Okay, so my glue's dried on this and we've got this little gap here right from the off. We need to sort that out. So I've cut a little length of wood strip and I've marked a position where I want to be able to fill the gap. I've measured the gap, it's 2mm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure my 2mm onto the strip. And then I'm going to go back further and measure 3mm. Now the reason for that is I want to make sure that if I've calculated this slightly wrong, or we get this further down the gap and therefore 2mm here isn't wide enough, I've got enough width to be filling the gap. And then we're going to draw on our wedge. So I now know what I need to be cutting. Now I can start by shortening this. It doesn't need to be right up against the line, but it right, so I've drawn out my wedge, and just a reminder, we put these two planks underneath to keep the rule steady, and then just push that up where we want to cut, and ever so gently score a line. And now I should be able to follow that line with my knife without needing the rule. And that allows me to press a little bit harder. Okay, so we can now check the fit. That wasn't helpful. I managed to just break the end. There we go. I've managed to break the end, so I could recut it, or I can just use a little bit of filler in. So just prise that out a little bit, get our glue, and completely fill the gap so that we know we've got glue on all the edges and the surface that this is going to end up in contact with. I'll just put that wedge in upside down. That's why you can't see the wood. I've not done that deliberately, but it doesn't make any difference. There we go. And hopefully the white glue will dry and we'll have done most of the filling. And when it dries, it contracts a little bit, so it perhaps won't, but we've basically filled that little bit there. So I can trim this end of the plank below that we put in last night now. This is Saturday morning now. Okay, and everything that we did yesterday is now perfectly dry and set and hard, and you don't need to leave it that long. So I know I'm good to remove my nails now, and then we can put some more planks down. And I quite enjoy the first planking process because you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just chucking it down, filling a surface, ready for sanding. Now obviously you do have to put an element of care into it, but you're not worried about gaps and things because you're going to be sanding it and filling it and what have you. So when we come to do the second planking, that's going to be quite different, because I'm going to show you how to do it if we're varnishing, and therefore we're going to take a lot of care and put a lot of thought into every plank, and it'll be worth the effort. It'll make the difference. I might plank second planking on one side using the same method as we've done with first planking, which is pretty much how they tell you to do it in the instructions, and then do the planking fan and more presentable cutting method for steelers and droppers in the on the other side, so you can see the difference in the finished look. Sometimes if you miss the bulkhead, certainly at this early stage, you can get the nail out from the back. So there we go, that's our nails out. I'm pretty happy with all of this. This is ready for sanding, but obviously we won't do that until we've got all our planks and any droppers and steelers done. So at this stage, one of the things I'm interested in is how are we going with the slope, and that all seems to be going well. So I think we're going to have a nice tight prow, and the same at the stern, but perhaps not so much. Need to be more mindful of trimming these back before the next planking goes on, because they sort of overlap each other as they cross over. So you can see this one here is forcing this plank out a little bit, so this plank needs to be trimmed down before the one on the opposite side of the hull goes into place. So let's just quickly do that. All I'm going to do is take my knife and just run it down so that the plank is shortened almost to where we're going to sand it down, and that's just going to allow us to make sure that this next plank can go right past that and be held tight in. Can you see the difference? That plank's been held out by that. I haven't noticed it. If you look in there, you can see that's not quite right. Now we'll sort it when we do the sanding, but yeah, it's worth trimming these planks down so that they're not impeding the plank on the other side. Right, time for the next plank. Okay, garboard plank to go on next. So that's my second plank going on, and what we want to do is start it so it's only slightly overhanging on one side. That gives us as much overhang as possible on this other side, and that means we've got a nice offcut for any steelers or droppers that we need. So we're going to run this along the length of this in a straight line. There's a little twist needed about here, and a little bit of a twist needed just right at the end here, but the plank can more than cope with that when we glue it down, so there's no need for steaming. So I'm just checking that everything's okay and I understand what I'm going to do. So time to put some glue on. So we can start at the bow end here. Just get rid of that. A little bit along that edge. The plank will be on that edge a little bit. So we just need glue along this top edge and on the very start tip of our bulkheads. Now once we've got that plank on, we'll turn the ship back the right way around, and then all of this little wet glue will slowly seep onto the plank. And you see how it's wanting to run down now, so as soon as we turn this the right way up, it'll all settle on the inside of the plank and give you a nice strong joint. There we go. So just get rid of our excess glue off the nozzle, put our cap back on. Right, so we're ready to go. So I haven't marked a center point on this because we're actually going from, it needs to be short at the end. So let's just put a nail in the nailer and plank goes on. I'm going to nail it on the middle one first. There we go. Nice and easy. You just have to check that your plank's not moved off from where you want it to be. So I'm just with my finger just correcting up and down. I over exaggerated that so you can see, but I'm just feeling where it is. So this one feels like it's slightly higher up than the one on this side, and that's why you get differences in the gaps when you come to do a planking fan. Why you can't make two identical planks to go on each side, because it just doesn't work that way. There we go, that's all good. That's nice and tight against that end there, so I don't even need to put a clip on, but you could do if you felt you had a need to. Whatever it takes to get these planks sat in full contact with everything. Okay, one last nail. through the other side. Right, so just gonna quickly clean the glue off. I'm more interested in the glue on this side so that it doesn't dry, causing a gap on the next plank. And then we turn this the right way around so that any glue runs back down, collects in the little wedged gap that we've created between the frame and the plank, and we have a nice strong bond. Okay, I always leave it a few minutes before I trim the plank just to make sure the glue's grabbed. We can now plan our second plank while that garboard plank is drying. So I'm now putting my model into its foam cradle. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this. You can buy this from Micromart. They've updated the design since I bought this one. I've had this a good few years, and you have a curve here, and it's got a different shape for the larger one with a flatter bottom, which I think helps do medium-sized ships as well as large. So I've used this for years, and it is absolutely the best tool for holding your model while you're working on it. It's not perfect, but you know, whatever is. You can buy all sorts of other tools, and you'll often see some companies pushing keel clamps. Now I have an Amati keel clamp. I've done a tool review on it, and it's an aluminium frame which has these clips on it, and what it does is it clamps onto your keel. The problem with it is, for me, it's only really useful before you've got the garboard plank on, or if you've got a false keel that's projecting below your planking. Once you put an actual keel strip on, and that's just held in place by wood, you don't really want to be using keel clamps, because there is a risk when you've got the boat at this sort of angle that putting pressure on it, you can snap the keel strip, and it can come away from where it's glued, or you can actually break the wood. So I don't like them for that reason. This is a much better solution. So they're about £16 to buy from Micromart. If you're in the US, you know, it's a great supplier, Micromart. They've got a lot of good tools on there. I believe I got these nail pullers from Micromart as well. But if you're in the UK, the shipping can be expensive. So what I tend to do is, if I'm going to buy from them, I buy lots of stuff and ask my mates if they want anything, and we combine the shipping, because the shipping from the US can be silly money. But it's a great little shop, and you can get hold of these, and they're really good, very flexible. If you don't want to venture into buying one of these, then a rolled up towel will work, or you could get some round insulating foam and put that in a towel so that you can build up the sides, or you could get some old packing foam or something like that, and cut a groove out for it. But being able to rest it so that you can angle it and you can work, knowing that you're keeping it safe, you're not on a hard surface, I think is a great way of working. And this is, for me, better than clamping also, because I can just pick it up and move it. I don't have to unclamp it and then readjust the clamps and then reclamp it. So it's quicker as well. So that's what this foam cradle is called. If you want to find it in Micromart, then in the little search box put triple duty foam cradle for models and ships. Yeah, they could have come up with a shorter name, surely. So we're on second plank, and as we've already said, this second plank is going to need a little bit of shaping. I haven't had my morning coffee, my brain's just not functioning. So, like I said before, I'm going to use the method on this side of cutting the plank in half so that we get a nice, easier fit and just have to do one side of the shaping. So I'm just these planks are longer than on Sherborne, quite considerably longer. Let me just show you. This is one of my Sherborne planks, so it's the same material, same width, but you've got a little bit more length to accommodate our hull here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to push it up so we've only got a small overhang at one end. That gives us a large overhang at the other end, and we know that we've got plenty of cut off for our steelers. I probably just said that, but sometimes because I'm filming it in sections, I forget what I've said, and so I'm actually repeating myself moments later in the video, but it might have been hours or days difference when I filmed it. Right, so that's our halfway point. I'm going to cut it just a little bit longer than that because that's going to allow a little bit of wriggle room. So I've cut my planks into two. I can put that to one side, and now I can work on shaping this one. So the end of the plank becomes the halfway point. So we would normally draw a mark. There we go. And just like it tells you in the instructions, if you've not followed Sherborne, and this is your first build, I'm just going to show you. We're just going to push it into shape. Soon as you notice that the plank naturally wants to start getting on top of the plank above it, it'll create a crossover point, which is just there, and that is where we're going to start our taper from. So I'm just going to mark that point. Now I'm often asked, but how do you know how much to taper? Well, there are a few little rules. One of them is have a look at what the plank's naturally doing. The plank is actually naturally wanting to, at the point, be completely on top of that plank. Can you see that? So that's the first thing to check. And then you apply a rule that you don't taper a plank any further than half the width of the plank. So these are 5mm planks, so we're not going to do a taper any deeper than 2.5mm. So even though the plank naturally wants to come to a point here, that's not what we're going to allow it to do. So we're going to lie it like that and go, right, 2.5mm is as deep as we'll go. Now if the plank was just crossing over and maybe a millimetre, we'd mark it at the millimetre point and let it do its natural thing. But the reason why we don't go any more taper any deeper than half the depth of the plank is to give the plank enough strength so that when we're putting a nail through it, it's not splitting and breaking. If we're really worried about it, we can pre-drill a hole for the nail, but I try not to do that. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do 2.5 from that point. So let's have a look at that. So I'm just going to mark my centre point, my 2.5mm, and I can now draw a line and this is not difficult at all. So that's our line, and now I'm simply going to cut that. I'm going to turn this around so I can see my cutting better. There we go, and we'll keep that because that might be a handy wedge later on, so we'll put that to one side. And that is our plank cut. Now I always like to just go over this bit here where we started the taper. You usually have some form of little step, so just going in with a 220 and just take that back and blend it in. It doesn't matter if it goes a little bit further back, because all of this is approximate and that's all it needs to be. But we quite easily could have started this taper a bit more that way anyway. So all this is doing is giving us a nice gentle line in. Now the other thing to remember, I'm mindful that some people might not have built the Sherborne and have gone straight to this, as this is our second absolute beginner's build. The other thing to remember is that your taper is always on the top. If you don't think you're going to remember which is your cut side, then just put a little arrow on it, so you know arrow means up. You know, we're covering all of this, we're sanding all this, so do what you need to do to make it work for you. So we can now line that up at our halfway point and plop our plank in, and we can see how that fits really quite nicely, and that can go straight in and then we can work on the other side. So this is the advantage of having cut it in half. I don't need to be thinking about shaping this, and then when you put it on, it's not quite right, it's shifted and all of that sort of stuff. It does make it easier. So yeah, let's get this one glued into place and then we can work on the other one while this one's drying. Okay, so once again, making sure that our glue is on the edge of the plank that it's butting up against, and that we've got plenty on the contact points of the bulkheads. And remembering that we're only going halfway along. Okay, so that's our adhesive on. I'm using my aliphatic resin wood glue, which is my preference. It's just that bit stronger. Right, we can now start nailing this in. Now normally we would put the first nail in the middle, but we've cut this in half. So I'm actually going to put the first nail in, one plank in, because this nail needs to be driven in at an angle, and it's easier to do that with the plank stabilised and my hands a little bit more free. So we're going to put the plank in position at the end point there, like so. Hold that in, push the next bulkhead point, push the plank into place, hold it down, put my nail in. I think that's just missed the bulkhead, so we'll come back to that in a second. I know because it's gone all the way down. Yeah, you see it's lifting a little bit. But it's enough to hold this in place while we drive this nail in. Just going to change the position so it's more natural for me to put the nail in. So making sure it's tight up against this plank. We're just going to keep dropping my nails out. That's because I'm waving this around while I'm talking. So a little tip, put your finger over the end so if the nail comes out it doesn't go flying. And we're going to go in at an angle. There you go, you can see the angle. I can see the nail. And we just drive that into the bulkhead at an angle like that. And that'll hold in exactly the same way as if I had just driven that nail in directly down. Right, let's re-nail this second one now. There we go. Okay, now we can continue that nailing along. And once you get into the flow of this, you'll start getting these planks down in no time at all. So this is where our taper starts. Make sure it's nicely tight and buttered up to our plank, as always. There you go, and see the plank is not fighting us, even though it naturally wanted to lie the full 5mm depth on top of the plank above it. It's quite happy where we've put it. I'm going to put one here, and then I check if that's in full contact, and we can always put another one in at that angle if we wish, but there's no need in this instance, so we can just come in and clean the glue off so that's not getting in the way of the next one. Where's my knife? There we go. It's already starting to dry. That's how quick this glue is, so I'm just taking it out with a knife. No glue seepage on the other areas. There we go. So you can see we've got that in, that looks good. It's not causing us any issues. I've not got any gaps. So doing the tapering and doing our best to fill the gaps with wood and keep the planking as level as possible just reduces the work. When we come to sand and fill, we're going to have to do less filling, and that's what I'm always trying to achieve. So with that one now in place, we can look at installing this second one. So this is our cut edge. Got a nice tight fit there because we've not messed with it since we've cut it. So I'm going to put my little arrow on it so I know it's this way up, and this is the way we were cutting it, and we just push the plank into place, going along the length and finding where it wants to cross over. So as we pull that round, you see how the plank sort of wants to bend out and create that sort of clinker effect. We want to stop that, and we stop that by doing the tapering. So the tapering point for me is there. And in this case, it's not wanting to go all the way over the plank. So that's about halfway. So if I apply the 2.5mm rule, and I'm just going to draw the point at where that's happening. So the plank, the end of the model is there. So that's where we need to be 2.5mm high. So let's get that one cut. So just measure our 2.5mm point, which is there. So we know that our taper is going to be quite a long taper actually this time. For a first taper, that is a long taper, but I just did, out of interest, I did a little planking fan, not that we're using it for the first planking, just to get an understanding, and a lot of these planks need to be reduced down to about 4mm, and I actually think it might have made a little bit more sense to have had 4mm planks for the first planking, because so many of them need to be about that really. But it doesn't, it's not great shakes. And I understand manufacturers using standard materials. You know, if they're buying different materials just for one kit, then that ups the price because they're not buying the volume. I totally get that, and price point is always in the mind of these manufacturers. Okay, so I've marked it out, but we can get cutting. Just check that, yeah, I'm happy I did that correctly. There we go. Should be able to just follow this with my knife now. He says. Okay. So that's our taper. I'm just going to, this is the end of our hull here, so I know this is extra length, but I don't want to cut it too short in case the positions all change. So I'm just going to cut that little point off. And once again with our 220, just smooth that part off there. Okay, right, let's get this on the model. So always test fit before we glue. Because sometimes you can make a catastrophic mistake and you want to make sure that you're aware of it before you've got glue down. That seems okay, it's just slightly wanting to bulge above the plank. We've not quite got this down as far as we need. So that's exactly why we test fit. So I'm just going to sand that down a little further. Which will take the taper back a little bit. It's often tiny amounts that make a difference. So we're okay there. we're okay there. Yeah, that's a lot happier now. That's a lot happier now. Okay. So we're ready to glue. I don't need to show you putting the glue on, you've seen me do that before. So I'll come back to you in a moment when our glue is on and I'm installing the plank, just in case there's anything that noteworthy happens. Okay. I'm just going to pop this first nail in. There we go. Then we can put our centre nail in. Like so. Now this method of cutting the planks like this is really handy when you've got complex hull shapes. I quite often use it on bigger models. Sometimes the strip won't be the full length of a larger model anyway. So yeah, I just find it handy for only having to deal with one shaping process per plank. And I think some of you might find this easier than shaping both ends of the plank, so I wanted to share that. Now obviously on the second planking, if you're going to be varnishing the wood rather than painting it, then it's not really appropriate to just cut your planks in half. But then I'd be saying to you, well, what length should your plank be to be realistic? So in 1/64 scale on British Navy ships, you'd be looking at a plank somewhere between 12 and 14 to 14 and a half centimeters long for a realistic plank length. But I missed that totally. But they did vary in length a little bit. But 14 and a half centimeters at 1/64 is absolutely the longest plank you'd get. So 12 would be a good average if you wanted to just show planking at realistic lengths. On a commercial ship where they're using probably got access to lower quality build materials than the Navy board would have, then you might want to go a bit smaller, maybe 10. So if we applied that to this, each one of these strips you'd be cutting into 3 sections. So you can see how at 2.5 millimeters the plank is not splitting. There we go. So that plank's on, it's looking happy. We do have a little bit of reverse clinker, we're gonna get that, I'm not worried about it. I'm a bit bothered about that though. It's not holding as tight down as I'd like. So you see it's sort of, just get you a bit closer. Always important to share these things. So where we've got this reverse clinker, I can push in with my finger. So that means that the plank's angling out. I'm expecting that to happen, but the nail's not quite holding it where I'd like it. So at this point, I can actually just go in with a clamp and clamp it so it's a little bit more flush with the plank above it. We won't be able to do that further down, but I think it'll be less of a problem further down. So the glue that's between these two planks will hold that in place, but the nail on its own is not quite doing enough to hold the wood in place. It wasn't a problem on this side, but this side's different, you see. So, right, okay, so that's that on. My next job is clean up the glue. You don't need to see me do that, so I'll be back to you in a mo. So just a reminder, do no more than a couple of planks on one side and then flip over to the other side. It prevents any risk, though unlikely in such a rigid frame, of any twist in the hull shape. It has happened to me in the past where I knew better and then I learned that I didn't, and I ended up with a hull that was a little banana in, and so I had to undo the planking and straighten it, and that's a world of work that is avoidable if you just do a couple of planks one side and a couple of planks that side. Many people will say one plank on per side and just keep doing it one plank at a time. You can get away with two, but I wouldn't ever really go beyond two. Certainly at this stage, when we're a bit closer into that, you've got like 3 planks and they're all being shaped and you're filling a hole, you can probably do all 3. But as a rule, 2 planks per side, and you can see we're already getting something that looks like a ship. So yeah, happy with that. We're going to let that dry, just because these are going to be in the way even in here when we want to do this side. But this next plank that we put down will absolutely need to be tapered. Let's get that one out of the way. Yeah, we can start chucking these on now, and then when we get to about this point here, we'll probably put the next plank on above the garboard plank, and that's when we'll start needing some droppers and maybe some steelers as well. Right, just pausing my first planking just to show you something, and just a reminder, if you want to see in detail how to do the first planking, go and have a look at my Sherborne build. You'll find it in the early stages of that build diary. So I'm not showing plank by plank, but what I did want to show you is that, when you're doing first planking, when you've got a double planked hull, you don't really need to worry about how the planks fall. The real rule of thumb is not to force the planks, because that creates shape problems for you. It's just keep going, let the planks fall where they want, and then fill the gaps. So when we look at this here, you can see we're going to need to put a steeler in. We're going to have to put a wedge in. We've already done one there, 3rd plank down, we had to put one in. You can see that. And then on this side, we've managed to get away without tapering the first 3 planks, but then tapered the 4th plank. And we're going to need to put a plank in here, a wedge in here. So, I'm not worried about any of that. When we look on the other side, you can see it's different. I haven't had to put a wedge in. I've been able to full width, then a taper, full width, then a taper, and that's just how the wood wanted to fall. And then on this side, we put a little wedge in right at the start, and then we've been able to do full plank, taper, full plank, full plank. So it really does make no difference how you do this, as long as you cover it so that we can sand it. It really doesn't matter. So don't compare your model to somebody else's, because it'll always be different. Planking will often be different, and as you can see, I'm applying the same rules, and I'm coming up with different results. And the rule is just put the plank on and see where it wants to go. So if I get another plank here, and I need to add another one on this side now. If I go here, I can see that straight away it wants to be tapering and what have you. So I'm going to plank from the bottom, and I'm going to need to put a wedge in, because I'm going to get a gap on either side, because that's where the wood naturally wants to fall. Now I can force it down like that,
but it's making it pop there, which means it's not going to stick to the bulkhead properly, and all sorts of other problems. So just let the plank do what it wants to do and fill it in. We'll worry about smartness on the second planking. All we need to do on the first planking is get it covered so we can sand it into shape. And when we do the second planking, we'll be starting off differently anyway, so we'll talk about that at the time. So right now, don't worry about it, just put it on, let the planks tell you what it needs to do, and let the planks guide you, and then that way it's a lot less stressful and you can just let it do its thing. So where we've got these big gaps forming, I'm just getting my pencil and marking out the top there so I know where to be putting my adhesive, and then I'm just going to mark here. I'm not going to want to run glue past that point, so then if we do the other side, you can see it's following the plank, the existing planking line until about this point here. So just mark that off. Doesn't have to be exact, and we don't need to put glue on the plank beyond that point. So there you go. That's how I'm tackling it. I think if you're new to planking, it can look a bit more daunting than it actually is. I mean, if you let the planks do the hard work, then your second planking will be so much easier. If you try and force things, you create a lot of work for yourself in terms of sanding and filling and clean up. So if you keep it as smooth as possible, follow where the plank wants to go, you've got less twisting, you've got less bulging out of the planks, and it's just easier for you. You don't have to worry about sanding it into shape, then filling it and sanding it, and it takes less work out of the next stage. So I always let the planks dictate where I go, and as you can see, I am not having to taper this plank. Now if I was using a planking fan, it would absolutely be telling me to taper, but we're just getting the coverage down and then filling the gaps. Now I've got a nail on this side that's poking through on that side, so I need to just deal with that. There we go. It's going down really quite nicely actually. In many ways an easier hull shape than the Sherborne was, but then at the same time in some ways this is a little bit more difficult, but we're not having to do any plank bending, but we are going to have more gap filling, I think. So on these ends, it's always a bit harder to get the nails in. I'm just clamping it as well, just to keep it flat the full length. So sometimes the plank will pull back a little bit and the nail just isn't sufficient to hold it. So I'll just do this other end. We'll worry about filling gaps at the end because I don't know what tapering and stuff I've got to do yet. And every time I taper something, I create a wedge offcut, which I can use for filling gaps, you see. So now you could, if you think the twist is a little bit severe, you could use the steam method and put it over the kettle and just put a twist in to help it lay flat. I don't think I need to, but by all means, if you think you need to, do so. There we go. I'll just leave that on for a sec. While those clamps are on, we can clean up the glue a little bit. I don't mind a little bit of glue being left on, but when you've got lots of it, it's just creating extra work for your sanding, so I'm not going to worry too much about it, but we'll get the worst of it off. The main thing is to make sure, as I've said before, no glue at the plank level. If I just pull that round, I can clean the glue off that and then put the clamp back on. Doesn't take long for wood glue to grab. There we go. Okay, so we can let that dry off, and whilst that's doing, I can turn around because we're even again now. We've got the same number of planks on each side, although it looks not too bad on the distances, but when you look at it end on, you can see we're a fair bit further down on one side than the other. And that's because of the differences in the tapering. So I'm now looking at what I'm going to do on this side, and it really is a case of looking at the planks and deciding what's my next best plank. I just pulled a pear wood out and I don't want a pear wood. So if I put this on, you can see it naturally wants to go across quite quickly. So that is, in my mind, dictating that I now plank from the bottom and work up. So because the planks are going to lie more or less together and follow that line, and what will happen is we will get 1, 2 planks in, and then we'll start having a gap. So I might want to taper anyway, and then we'll have a small gap in the middle, and then we'll have to fill it. And if you look at the instructions, that's what they end up with. They end up with a small gap which would naturally be on this curve, because it's fairly even getting to the curve, and then the curve creates this bulge in the middle. So you're naturally going to have a gap. So, you know, it doesn't matter whether we cut the plank in half or not, it naturally wants to go up. Now, ideally, you want to try and make sure that you terminate any gap filling or any short pieces on a bulkhead. So we could put a plank in, cut it off halfway through the bulkhead there, where it's already starting to want to taper, so we could taper it from this point here and end it halfway on that plank, knowing that we'd then have probably a little wedge plank to put in there, but I don't like the idea of it. So it is simpler for me to just plank up from this level until we get to that point, and then we can start filling. And you know, if that means we've got to shape planks with a bit of steam, it's not a biggie. But yeah, so I'm, like I said, I'm just letting the planks tell me what we need to be doing. Now if I go onto this side, you can see I've got the same issue. That plank wants to go up quite steeply now, so if I follow this line, that's making more sense. So I think that is what we'll do. And I can actually do this now, and it's not going to interfere with what we've just done. So I'm going to crack on. You understand what I'm doing. You've just seen me do the last one, and we're doing something similar. So I might come back to you when we get filling.